Okay, these are the 7.2 notes, and today's objective is to factor quadratics and other polynomials. So we'll be doing other polynomials that have more than just x squared in them. Now keep in mind that the factored form of a quadratic looks something like this, and that when we multiply this out by distributing, we end up with something like x squared plus 2x plus 4x plus 8, and the two in the middle are like terms and they get added together. So then we get our quadratic equation, which is x squared plus 6x plus 8. So this 4 and 2, which are factors of 8, they also add together to give us the middle term 6. So that's important to keep in mind as we go backwards today. Today we're going to start with a quadratic and end up with the factored form. So let's take a look here at number 1. We have the quadratic x squared plus 12x plus 35. Now the first part of this is easy because I know that x times x is going to give me x squared. That's the only thing that can give me x squared. But at this point I want to write down the factors of 35. And as I'm writing those factors down, I'm also trying to get factors of 35 that in the middle will add up to be 12. So one set of factors of 35 is 1 times 35, but that sum is 36 and not 12. So we've got to think of other factors of 35. So another factor, or two other factors of 35 are 5 and 7, and that sum is 12. So those are the factors of 35 that we want, and we wanted a positive 12. So the factored form of this trinomial is x plus 5 times x plus 7. Because if we distribute this out, x times x is x squared, x times 7 is 7x, 5 times x is 5x, and 5 times 7 is 35. And then these two middle terms make the 12x. So you don't have to re-multiply that out, but I wanted to show you that this factored form does equal what we started with. So let's take a look at number 2 here. I've got x squared minus 6x plus 5. Now remember, I want factors of x squared and factors of 5 to be in my factored form. And the x squared is easy to get the factors of. It's just x times x. But 5, there's only one set of factors. That's 1 times 5. But I need the 1 times 5 to add together to be negative 6. And the only way to make that happen is to make the 1 and the 5 both negative. Because negative 1 times negative 5 is still positive 5, but when I add negative 1 and negative 5 together, I will get negative 6. So x squared minus 6x plus 5 factors to x minus 1 and x minus 5. Or you could put x plus negative 1 times x plus negative 5. Okay, on number 3, I've got x squared minus 2x minus 8. And so again, I want factors of x squared, which is x times x. And then I want factors, and this time I want factors of negative 8. So I've got to have two numbers that would multiply together to be negative 8. Well, the only way to multiply two numbers to be negative is for one of the numbers to be positive and one of the numbers to be negative. So I'll just start writing my factors of 8, and I'm going to need the sum to be negative 2. So 1 times negative 8 would be negative 8, but that sum is negative 7. And negative 1 times positive 8 would also be negative 8 when I multiply them, but that sum is positive 7. So I still haven't found the sum of negative 2. So negative 2 times positive 4 would also be negative 8, and that sum is positive 2. So then if I just switch it around, positive 2 times negative 4 is also negative 8, and that sum is negative 2. So this is the one that we want. So the factors of negative 8 are 2 and negative 4, positive 2 and negative 4. And when I add that together, I'll get my middle term, which is negative 2. So it's x plus 2 and x minus 4, or x plus negative 4. Okay, on number 4, my quadratic is x squared plus 6x minus 7. So I want factors of x squared and factors of negative 7 this time. So x times x is x squared. So the factors of negative 7, again, because it needs to be negative, I need to have one positive and one negative. So I've got 1 times negative 7 is negative 7, and that sum is negative 6. But I need my sum to be positive 6. So I'll try to switch it around where I use negative 1 times positive 7. If I multiply those together, I still get negative 7, but that sum is positive 6, which is what I want. I want my sum to be that middle term, positive 6. So this is the correct factorization. So I'm going to have x minus 1 and x plus 7. And again, you can always go ahead and distribute and check to make sure it equals what you started with. By the way, it is possible to have a quadratic that cannot be factored. In other words, if you write down all the factors and none of your factors give you the correct sum in the middle, then you would check that the quadratic is prime. In other words, it can't be factored. So you'll see that as an option here on some of these homework problems. So after you write down all the factors and you don't get the correct sum with those factors, then that means the quadratic is prime. Okay, looking at number 6, the first thing on number 6 is this trinomial's in the wrong order. So it's important that you put these trinomials in what's called standard form. And that means that you always should have your t squared or your x squared should be first, and then just your t's in the middle, so plus 7t should be next, and then the number without the variable should be at the end. So it's very important to put those first. Now we can factor this trinomial because it's in standard form. So I want the factors of negative 30, and I want to get their sum, and their sum needs to be positive 7. So factors of negative 30, I'm going to have one positive and one negative. So 1 times negative 30 is negative 30, but that sum is negative 29. Then I've got negative 1 times positive 30, and that sum is positive 29. Then I could have 2 times negative 15, and that sum is negative 13. And negative 2 times positive 15, and that sum is positive 13. Then positive 3 times negative 10, that sum is negative 7. And negative 3 times positive 10, and that sum is positive 7. So we don't have to finish this out. We could, the only other factors are 5 times negative 6, where that sum is negative 1, and negative 5 times positive 6, and that sum is 1. But remember, on this one, we want our sum to be 7, so these are the factors that I need to use of negative 30 for the sum to be positive 7. So this trinomial's factored form is t minus 3 times t plus 10. And the reason it's plus 10 is because the 10 is supposed to be positive. On number 7, we've got 5x squared plus 40x plus 35. Now this one's a little bit different because we have a 5 in front of the x squared. But to make your life a little bit easier, the first thing you want to do is factor out any greatest common factor between these three terms. So the greatest common factor between those three terms is 5. So that if I pull a 5 out, I'm left with x squared plus 8x plus 7. So that's what we were doing yesterday on 7.1. Now that I've got the greatest common factor pulled out, now I can factor this trinomial that's inside that parentheses. So I'll write down the factors of 7, and I want the sum to be 8. So the factors of positive 7 are 1 times 7, and that sum is 8. So the factoring this trinomial is 5 times x plus 1 times x plus 7. And you do leave the 5 outside the parentheses, and so this is your final answer. Okay, number 8, I've got 4x to the third minus 28x squared plus 48x. Now again, to make this easier, if there's any greatest common factor, we should pull that out first. So I can see that the greatest common factor between these three is 4x. They have a 4 in common. 4 will go into all three of those, and they have an x in common. So I'm pulling a 4x out, and that leaves me with 1x squared for the first one minus 7x plus 12. Because 4x times x squared is 4x to the third. 4x times negative 7x is negative 28x squared. And 4x times 12 is 48x. Now I'm ready to factor this trinomial, leaving my 4x outside. So I know x times x is x squared. Now I need to write down factors of positive 12 that will give me a negative 7 sum. The only way to get a positive 12 when I'm multiplying, but still a negative when I'm adding, is for both of my factors to be negative. So negative 1 times negative 12 would be positive 12, but that sum is negative 13. Then negative 2 times negative 6 is positive 12, but that sum is negative 8. And negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12, and that sum is negative 7. So this is the correct one that we want. So x minus 3 and x minus 4 is the factored form of that trinomial. So that negative 3x and negative 4x would give us the negative 7x in the middle.